As Assistant Chairman of the NAPE Operations Committee, I'm beyond excited to welcome this distinguished group of leaders to the stage for the 2026 NAPE Energy Summit. I'll start by providing some brief introductions for our panelists and our moderator. First, we have Governor Mike Dunleavy of Alaska. Governor Dunleavy was first elected governor in 2018 and re-elected in 2022, becoming the first Republican governor in Alaska to win re-election since 1978. He has emphasized strengthening the economy and protecting jobs as key priorities of his administration and is recognized as a strong advocate to the state business community. Next, we have Audrey Robertson, Assistant Secretary of Energy, Office of Critical Minerals and Energy Innovation with the U.S. Department of Energy. As I mentioned, Audrey was confirmed as the Assistant Secretary of Energy on October 23, 2025. She leads the Department of Energy's Office of Critical Minerals and Energy Innovation, overseeing one of the nation's largest energy research and development portfolios. Next up, we have Mike Summers, President and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute. Mike. Mike is the 15th Chief Executive Officer of the American Petroleum Institute, the largest trade association representing all aspects of the U.S. natural gas and oil industry. Our last panelist is David Bucknall, CEO of Eneos Energy. Since 2021, David has led his team to grow both European and U.S. upstream oil and gas markets. He has also secured a long-time LNG supply agreement from the U.S. to provide supply security for the European market. Finally, last but not least, our moderator, Michelle Phillips. She's been up here a lot. She's Vice President of Lime Rock Resources. She's also the chair of the NAPE Operator Committee and is largely responsible for organization of much of what you've seen today and witnessed. So without further ado, Michelle, take it away.
Thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it. Let's start for Audrey. Our conversation today is about the transition from what ifs to how to. What is the single biggest regulatory or permit-related hurdle the DOE is currently working to dismantle to ensure federal-state projects move at the speed of industry for both critical minerals development and fossil fuel production?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for having me today. Thank you for a really wonderful experience celebrating all these American heroes.
Just in case anyone needs one.
That was extraordinary. It's an honor to be here. So the question is, what next to how to? So if you don't know the Secretary of Energy, and I think many in this room do, he is a doer. He is an energy entrepreneur. He is a get things done Secretary of Energy. I'd say the same would be true for our president. There is normal time and there's Trump time. So we are working across the entire government, not just with the Department of Energy, where I sit, but with my colleagues at the Department of the Interior and the EPA, which are sort of the three energies that most frequently intersect in permitting and permitting reform. And across the government between initiatives like Fast 41, which is a fast-track permitting operation too. I'm sure our Governor of Alaska will talk about the MOU that was signed earlier this year with our specific permitting council. There is an absolute understanding and focus that without permitting reform, you can't expedite any sort of industrial activity. Those of us in the oil and gas business know that very well. My life before this was sitting in your chair as an attendee at NAPE for over a decade. But the goal today is to be action-oriented, to actually move permits through the system, whether they're in mining, whether they're in transmission lines, to make sure that oil and gas permits occur on the fastest basis possible. And Secretary Burgum, Administrator Zeldin, Secretary Wright are committed to that. So it's a new way of doing the government, but it's been really successful at advancing permitting. I think the first year behind us, the next 2 or 3 years are going to be exceptional in how we're able to move things forward.
Governor Dunleavy, Alaska is often the proving ground for balancing resource extraction with conservation. How can other states replicate the Alaska model of streamlining the path from permit to production without sacrificing environmental standards?
That's a great question, and so it's really about alignment within your, for example, in Alaska, in the state itself and with the federal government. We're heavily dependent upon the federal government. 60% of Alaska's lands, 222 million acres, is actually controlled by the federal government. We have more wetlands than any other state in the country, so we've been subject to a lot of EPA action over the years. And the way to get from point A to point B is to make sure you have alignment within your own state, alignment with your stakeholders, alignment with the businesses you're actually doing business with in the state, as well as the federal partners as well. We have an annual energy conference, and last year, first year that Trump 2.0 was in business, a number of secretaries came up to Alaska. Secretary Wright, Secretary Burgum, and Lee Zeldin came up along with a number of staff members. And Emily Dominicio also came up. And Emily is in charge of the permitting process out of the White House. So we just sat down with her and we said, look, Emily, over the years, it's been very difficult for Alaska dealing with the federal government on a whole host of issues involving permits. And so within a matter of 5 minutes, we came up with a concept in which we would work together to meld our permitting process so it's more streamlined and in alignment with the federal government. And working through Fast 41 and Emily's office, we're able to get a number of plays permitted, a number of actions taken care of. And so having partners, having alignment is critical. If you don't have that, you're going to have problems. I'm not sure that there's a number of outfits here in the audience today that have run into that. But for Alaska, it's absolutely key that we have alignment with the federal government. And I'm sure we're going to talk about in a moment here how we can make that permanent. But right now, thanks to the Trump administration, Alaska is back in business. We were the only state to get an executive order on day one when he returned, because he sees the importance of Alaska and also understood that under the previous administration, under the Biden administration, Alaska was in tough shape. So alignment's the key right out the gate.
Mike, from an industry perspective, we hear a lot about certainty. In 2026, what does a stable regulatory environment actually look like to a rig operator or a developer?
Great to be here at NAPE, and such an honor to be with this distinguished panel. Governor, you really put your finger on the pulse of this right now. And Audrey, I want to compliment this administration, because the focus of this administration on energy development has been second to none of any administration that we have ever dealt with. From top to bottom, from the president himself, who said drill baby drill in his state, or in his inaugural address, to the appointments that he has put forward, from the 3 cabinet secretaries that we care most about, to the Energy Dominance Council, to have one place in the federal government where every energy company can go to make sure that they're getting the permits that they need to succeed. This administration has been better than any other administration that we have ever dealt with in terms of the success of the oil and gas industry. You have made energy dominance the most important part of this agenda, and I think our industry is going to benefit long-term from the work that you have done. And I know that that's true in the great state of Alaska as well. But for us, the coin of the realm for permanent reform going forward is that we have to make it durable. And unfortunately, we know that President Trump isn't always going to be in office. And we need to make sure that the pendulum swing that will inevitably come in American politics has to be as narrow as possible. So we have to make sure that the American people understand how important permitting reform is and the regulatory reform that they have put forward. And that means every day we have to work to deliver on lower costs for American consumers, on building the infrastructure that is promised, and making sure that what we know is going to be what we call the demand decade of increased energy demand doesn't hurt American consumers, but benefits American consumers. So we know the course, the next 3 years are all going to be about proving that this industry is up to that challenge. And I know that we have a partner in the United States government now, and a partner in the state of Alaska to actually make the promises that we have made to American consumers for lower costs, for reliability, and of course for making our fuels ever cleaner, are met every single day. But we know that we have partners at the federal and the state government now that will make those promises real.
So David, now for an international perspective, you're a leader in global petrochemicals and you see the friction in the global market all the time. From a European perspective or an outside perspective, what's one thing the US government could do right now to ensure that North America remains competitive as an energy hub against global rivals?
Yeah. Firstly, I'm glad to be here as well amongst the esteemed panel. And yes, agreed, the administration is doing a fantastic job. And agree with Mike that it needs to carry on. I think to answer the question from an international perspective, it's worth telling a short story about how we got into energy. So INEOS is a chemicals company. We have manufacturing in the US, we have manufacturing in Europe, we have manufacturing now in China as well. 26,000 employees globally. It's privately owned, and a great perspective of what's happening across the world. A number of years ago, actually saw, with the shale revolution, saw the US industry that we owned become much more competitive than the other businesses. And that really got the owners of the business thinking why that was. And it's the shale revolution that really caused it. There's two things there. One is the energy cost, and the other is the feedstock cost into the chemical facilities were low. So they tried to bring some of the expertise from the US into Europe to say, let's do some shale in Europe. That didn't go down very well. So if you think it's difficult here with permitting, you should try Europe. So if you look at the global chemical business, you've got a US business that's advantaged from a feedstock and energy cost perspective. You've got Chinese that is advantaged probably from a labour perspective, but not necessarily from a feedstock or oil and gas. And Europe isn't competitive on either. And then you've got a Middle East that's competitive on both. So if you look at that whole thing, what I think we need from the US is more of the same, but it's not falling back into the trap that Europe's fallen into, which is a kind of a hopeful strategy that's quite protective, that's very tax orientated, that's about net zero as opposed to anything else. But those strategies don't work. If you think about why the US has worked, it's because there's a belief in the open market, there's a belief in investment. You didn't go from 6 million barrels a day to 13.8 by somebody in government saying that's a great idea. What happened is the permits were granted, the framework was there, the industry invested, and actually it's the role of government to provide the open market. So I guess to come to the question is, what do we want from the US, is please keep that. And as you reshape, you want to reshape supply chains, understand shipping, understand critical minerals, understand all of that. In all of that, actually keeping the open market and the free markets going is what we'd ask for, because the US is connected to the rest of the world. We breathe the same air, we use the same resources.
Good news, we're on the right track. For all of our panelists, we're seeing extreme volatility in global energy markets. How much of our domestic strength is reliant on infrastructure that we haven't yet built, or it needs to be further developed? And are we moving fast enough on wires and pipes to keep up with current need?
I'll jump in. So if you've got oil and you have oil to move, you have gas to move, and you have electricity to move, if you don't have the infrastructure to move it, it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So that's why permitting is huge from our perspective in Alaska. And one of the things that we hope comes out of Congress sooner than later is some real structural reform to permitting that's long-lasting and durable, as was said, because you need investors to be able to count on that. And also taking a look at what they call lawfare, using the courts to slow things down, where before the courts were supposed to, judge and decide if something was following the law. Recently, and again, Alaska's a classic case of this because Alaska's loved to death by NGOs compared to many other states. You know, for example, if you go on online, you'll see advertisements, you know, give $25 to save Alaska from itself. You don't see that from Delaware. It doesn't say give $25 to Delaware. Sorry if you're from Delaware, but you know, I'm not saying they're not interested in saving Delaware. It's Alaska. So we live or die on permitting. And when the Supreme Court was able to have a ruling on Chevron, the Chevron deference case, as well as Sackett, because we're 60% of the country's wetlands are in Alaska, that was huge. But we got to take that one step further. If we can codify in law through Congress, permitting reform with standards that make sense to everyone, states, sovereigns, business, and the lawfare practices that the NGOs have really embraced, I think you got a long runway for investment here in the United States, and I think we'll end up being the leaders for quite some time in the world in this. But if you can't move your product, it doesn't do you any good.
Happy to jump in here. The SPEED Act was passed by the House towards the end of last year, which was the first step towards codifying permitting reform. It's so important that that piece of legislation, or something very close to it, is codified to the permanence of this administration and the important role it plays, not just in oil and gas and infrastructure, but as the name of my office implies, we're very involved in critical minerals. And the timeline to produce from a mine to build a critical mineral processing facility, a refiner. Just last week, we announced the first smelter for aluminum to be built in Tulsa, Oklahoma since 1980. We've spent the last 40 years deindustrializing the United States. And in much the same way that we were 20 years ago in the energy business, 25, where we were being beat by our adversaries at the energy game. People saw what oil and gas could do to elevate or to power society, and we weren't winning. We were the high-cost producer. We were playing in an unfair game where governments and adversarial nations could produce at a loss and undercut us, and it caused a lot of problems in the 70s in this country, and a lot grew from that, including American ingenuity to beat it. And the shale revolution was born, and we didn't compete on the same terms as adversarial nations for those resources. We leapfrogged over them. And instead, you know, it's such a privilege to be part of the energy business in America, but we were truly able to deliver the independence over the last 20 years on from an energy perspective, because of the ingenuity of America, because of our ability to have the rule of law, property rights, all of those important elements that are codified in our Constitution. What's not codified is the ability to permit. And so NEPA is a really important part of environmental stewardship, but it can be weaponized, and it has. Anyone here who's ever gone through a NEPA analysis, which, yeah, I know, it's not a fun thing. It has not been used for good as much as we had all hoped it would be. So I think this administration has a chance to fix that from not just an infrastructure standpoint, but just from a general energy standpoint.
So I think from, we were talking a bit earlier, just building on that sometimes the lawfare doesn't even make sense. And you know, we can sit here and complain about it, but actually the thing is we need to storytell, we need to carry on doing it. And the owner of the business that I work for INEOS is Jim Ratcliffe, and he's been in the press recently about talking about the way in which Europe is deindustrializing. And it's caused partly by choices that politicians make, but also by the same lawfare that you see the NGOs with the pipes doing it in Europe as well. We want to build a cracker in Belgium. The politicians, both local and state, really support it. It's the most efficient design. It uses hydrogen. It's exactly what you want, but yet it's still the permits are still being frustrated by the NGOs. And then you step back even further than that. The energy policy has caused closure of about 10% of European chemical capacity over the past couple of years. And all that's done is it's moved manufacturing to China and the US. And because of the energy content of the manufacturing in China in particular, it's actually increased CO2 by 20 million tons over that period and lost 70,000 jobs in Europe. So what's happening is you hollow out Europe, you hollow out the employment, and you do worse for the environment. So if you're a well-meaning, lawfare NGO, you're doing the worst thing for the planet. And actually, we need to tell that story as hard as we can.
Look, here in the United States, we've been talking about permitting reform for decades. In fact, Governor Dunleavy's own state, you think about the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, which actually brought the oil from where it was on the North Slope to where it needed to be to get to market. It took an act of Congress to get that pipeline built in the late 1970s. And here we are in 2026, and the last major pipeline that was built in this country, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, took an act of Congress to get it done. That is no way to run a permitting process. Unfortunately, that was the position that we've been over the course of the last 4 decades. So I am of the view that this is the Congress, this is the time when Republicans and Democrats have to come together to solve this problem. Why? Goldman Sachs predicts that in the next 10 years, energy demand is going to go up 50% in this country. That's on the low end of those predictions. If we can't get this stuff permitted in a timely manner, and we have to rely on a dysfunctional Congress to authorize every single major pipeline project, we are never going to be able to compete with China. We're never going to compete with nation states that are hostile to American interests. This is the time to get it done. And unfortunately, the window is shrinking every single day. This administration has done everything that they could do at the administrative level. Congress now has to step in and do what they have to do to get it done. By the way, the Supreme Court has done more than Congress has done between the 7 counties decision and the Sackett decision and repealing the Chevron deference with the Loper-Bright decision. The Supreme Court has been more active on permitting reform than our elected up representatives have been. So what we need to do right now in this closing window, and it's really just 2 or 3 months left, is we have to all be on top of our members of Congress to say this is the time. Because we know a political wave is probably coming in the other direction. And if you think that permitting reform is hard to get done now, just wait until the Democrats control the United States House of Representatives. This is the moment to codify everything that Audrey has been working on, so that we no longer have to deal with these permitting delays. And the most important thing that we can get done is judicial reform. Because you talk to API member companies, we can get through NEPA, we can get through the state process. It is the endless judicial delays that occur. So that has to be part of any real and realistic permitting reform process going forward.
Governor, do you see anything from a state perspective that needs to be pushed forward? We talked a lot about it on the federal side.
Well, again, Alaska is pretty unique. I mean, the very existence of Alaska as a state was predicated upon its ability to develop its resources, unlike any other state. We were forced to collectivize all of our resources under the sovereign. Our executive was constructed by the framers of Alaska to move quickly, to be unified for the purpose of developing its resources. And then 1970 hit, which was Earth Day. Then you had Greenpeace. Greenpeace, its first action was to go to Alaska from Vancouver to stop Amchinka's atomic testing. But it's been a series of brutal beatings by NGOs and their allies in Congress. You know, it's interesting when you think about this, how you get from point A to point B. I think this is the only time in history where, last decade or two, where we've had an abundance of energy potential, the ability to transport it, some of the best science ever, yet that we've turned our back on common sense and science. And that's one of the things I really like about the Trump administration, regardless of what some of the press will say. They've restored a lot of common sense to what we took for granted decades ago. Following the science, following standards, following laws, and not listening to the screaming and yelling by some of the NGOs. But we do have to codify it. If we don't, this doesn't become just an economic issue, it's a national security issue. It seriously is a national security issue for the United States. And if we believe that and we move on that, we can take some action, I think, that'll secure, once again, a long runway for investment, but also security for this country.
Audrey, do you have any thoughts about being part of that administration?
Well, no, I would
Yeah.
just add the endangerment findings, another really important really important action that helps restore science and facts to the way we regulate. And no, I mean, I couldn't be more proud to serve this country, to work for this president, to be part of this administration, because it is mostly business leaders trying to come up with common sense solutions to protect all the constituents and work for America. We're here to deliver for America, not for one group over another, not for an ideology, not for some means to an end. It is about creating a strong, resilient America and especially a national security issue. You look at where we are today, producing 13 million barrels a day. Where would we be if we only produced 4? Where if we went the other way and we were not producing shale and we were importing, we would be, the whole landscape of the world would be different. We're on the precipice of an energy tsunami, I'd like to say. It is unbelievable what's going to happen in the next several years, because the next frontier will be information. And that comes with AI, and then the whole supply chain that supports that, from not just chips and water and power, but critical minerals, metals, mining. You go all the way up the food chain to, we need mining in this country again. We don't have that. We haven't been able to permit mines. So yeah, I'm honored to be here and honored to be in this administration, and hope to have more common sense solutions that are brought to from Washington to the rest of America.
I want to take a peek over here with David and Mike and talk about, when we talk about innovation, people think about software. We're talking a lot about AI and all of these software solutions. In energy, it can be a mix of both, right? Software as well as hardware. What do you think is our most underrated piece of infrastructure, like pipelines or ports or grid tech, that can really determine where capital will flow over the next 3 or 4 years? Also interested in just anything that you guys have to say and think about innovation in general.
The risk of repeating every other panelist that we've had, AI. There you go. But actually, if you think about it, you're right. Energy is all about hardware. Just like driving cars is all about hardware. But Uber is all about using cars in a very, very efficient and effective way. And that's the way we think about the software and using it with particularly our US onshore business, where we have lots of diverse wells and activity going on, which is impossible to control. It's impossible to control, difficult to control by visiting and going around and looking at things. But if you've got real-time data streaming in, and then if you put something on top of that that says, actually, we're going to tweak the way the pumps are operating. Some of the pumps, we use machine learning to tweak them 600 times a day. What that means is that they're not under stress. It means that they're pumping the proper phase of oil and gas, as opposed to just going away and trying to do something at the wrong pace. And if you can use software and innovation to do things like that, then those pump rods aren't going to break. It's just going to work. And our playbook is taking assets and taking the reliability up from mid-80s normally when we buy things to high 90s. And if you do that, you get more production. And it's about the sharing economy, or the optimization economy, or the learning economy, where you use
Money, which is the goal.
Absolutely, yeah, which you can reinvest, and you're not fixing stuff, you're operating it. So I think the way you use AI, the way you use machine learning, the way you use the software to impact the hardware is the biggest point of innovation, I think, today.
I think the best part about David's answer is, a lot of the time when we talk about AI, we talk about how it's going to change other industries' future and the increased demand that's going to come to our industry. But I think what you hit on, which is so very important, is how it's going to impact this industry. I mean, if you think about the fact that in a lot of cases, we're leaving over 90% of the resource currently in the ground. And AI is going to give us the ability to explore the subsurface in faster and smarter ways. AI could be the next fracking revolution in our industry. It could be the pathway for us to find more of that resource that we know is going to be required, so that we can continue to win the AI race. And we know that there's a lot of local opposition against data centers and against AI generally, because people are afraid of what it's going to do to their future employment. You know, I have college-age kids. You know, what kind of job is going to be there for them in the future? But one thing we know is whatever it is, it's going to require more energy. So the future of our industry is great, but it also is going to really change, I think, the way that this industry operates in terms of extraction of the materials that are going to be required, whether it's critical minerals or oil and gas far into the future.
Just to underline that, you're right. When you talk about the subsurface, we have a small team, but using AI, using big data, using the ability to do things faster, we can do a lot more with the same people. And some tasks that used to take months take weeks or hours, actually. And not all of them, but some of them. So you have to be very, very judicious about how you use them. And you're right. I think if you can be more productive in the way you work, then you can extract more and you can do more with less. Just on the jobs thing, I heard someone say this, attributed to somebody from Amazon. They said you're unlikely to lose your job to AI, but you probably will lose your job to somebody who knows how to use AI better than you. So I think that's the thing to bear in mind there.
Just wondering if we can use AI to help Congress move faster and we can leverage that somehow.
That requires regular intelligence, not artificial intelligence.
Not artificial. You're right. Governor Dunleavy and Audrey, we talk about the federal and state handshake. What does that where does the handshake usually slip? Is it a matter of funding or is it a conflict of mandates? So you talked about alignment. That sounds like a big piece of the problem, but that conflict between state resources management and federal environmental goals, just tell me about the interaction between federal and state.
Sure. I'm a big believer in federalism. It's a great thing. States have rights. It's really important. It's a foundational element to our democracy. Where they collide is when the needs of the country or the needs of an industry are somehow hijacked by a state that is not thinking about the country or thinking about, frankly, their state. I mean, there's a state on the West Coast that's done some pretty crazy things to their state with all of the resources that they have. They have policies in place that have regulated out most of the refiners. But that's their state's right to do that. I'd say from the federal standpoint, we want to work with every state. We want to work with every country to try and provide the data, transparency, and impact of what development looks like. So when it comes to data centers, building an AI toolkit based on science that we can deliver and help communities understand what will really be the impact if you have a data center here, what will really be the impact if a mine opens. So we're trying to use data, science, and transparency to equip states and communities with the tools that they need to understand those trade-offs and to understand the benefits. People like to talk about the negatives. They don't talk about the extreme benefits to communities when you have new pipelines, when you have new facilities. That I mentioned the Oklahoma or new aluminum smelter. It will be a huge driver of value in Tulsa. It's going to be an enormous opportunity for Tulsa and the state of Oklahoma and for the United States to have an aluminum smelter there. But equipping them with the data is how we're trying to reach out to states and be as open and transparent as Secretary Wright was up in Alaska and has done a lot of work up there. I mean, we all win when our states win, so we want to equip them with everything they need to make good decisions.
Yeah, I'd say the big handshake is a reality with this administration. We talked about what we need to do to make that long term. But again, Alaska was allowed to become a state only under the compulsion that we would develop our resources. That for us is the big handshake. In other words, we'll let you in, but you're going to have to develop your resources. Subsequent administrations have not followed up on that commitment. As a matter of fact, they've actively worked against Alaska. This administration is totally different. This administration is how all administrations should be when it comes to resource development. We have enormous resources in Alaska. It's not that we've run out of resources. It's all of the stuff that the province of Alaska has, even though it's remote, it's cold, etc., is above ground. it's in many cases it's Washington, it's NGOs, and it's weaponizing the courts. If those things were eliminated or somehow ameliorated, how you want to word it, Alaska would be one of the richest states in the country per GDP as a result of all the resource that we have. And what we could do with that resource in terms of helping the country with its national security issues, critical minerals, rare earths, strategic metals, timber, oil, gas, the list goes on and on, would be tremendous. And what it would do to alleviate poverty, what it would do to alleviate energy poverty. I mean, I can go on and on, but the handshake has to be long-term. It can't be we have a deal that as soon as you turn around, you walk out and you start to invest in something. I mean, you can imagine that in your daily business. You put a lot of energy, you put a lot of resource into investing to build something up under a certain understanding, and that understanding doesn't exist in the next administration or the next Congress. So that's a problem. That's a problem for all of us. It's a real problem for Alaska. But that handshake is important, and it's got to be alignment and understanding and following through on those commitments.
So we've spent the whole day talking about the business of energy. Really gets me thinking from your perspective, where does this conversation need to continue for everyone in the audience? Where do we need to continue to innovate? What do we need to continue to do to push forward? And we've got some really unique, different perspectives that I think will give us a lot to think about and continue developing. You want to start down the line? Anyone want to volunteer?
Well, as an elected official, I see policy as huge. Again, if you can't move your resource because of policy decisions, doesn't matter. So I would say that I would hope that everybody in the audience here is a participant in the electoral process. Because if you're not going to do that, you're going to become a victim. You'll be a victim, and you don't want to do that. You want to be a beneficiary. So you've got upcoming midterms. We've got, I think, the next several months to make some huge decisions on making sure that we have a surety and permitting and lawfare. But when you're looking down the road, you can't just hope something happens. If you're in a multi-million, billion-dollar business, you can't just hope it happens. You have to have a strategy to make it happen. So again, I would say from an elected official's position, policy is key. We're going to be doing everything we can to make sure that we get the right people back in Congress to codify this for the long term. And quite honestly, I think if we're able to do that in these midterms, to get the right people, and before then in the summertime, and codify what we're talking about, I think you're going to have a lot of investment, more investment flowing to America, and I think you're going to, see this country, if you can believe it or not, actually perform even better than what we can imagine right now. But if we don't have the policy, we're going to be in trouble.
I think from a business perspective, the normal state of a business is to stay out of politics. It's try not to offend either side, and because you know that administrations come and go. But actually, what I think has to happen is people have to get braver and to be more public and to stay and call out when things are wrong. And anything else we're doing that, it's easier to do because we're a private company. If you're a public company, you end up, you have to play every side of whatever you're doing. But I think if the industry doesn't speak up when things don't work, who else is going to speak up?
I completely agree. There's an old saying that just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean that politics doesn't take an interest in you. And I think this industry, API has been around for 100+ years, 106 years. This industry has understood since the very beginning about how important it was that we work together to advance policies that make sense. Alaska is actually a great example of a state that works together to advance the importance of their state. I've been up there a number of times, and it is amazing to me the unity that the people of Alaska have on energy development. It's Republicans and Democrats, it's union members and non-union members, it's Native peoples up there who know how important energy development is in that state, and that is actually the coalition that we're going to have to continue to build if we're going to have success in advancing the president's priorities. It's one of the reasons why we've built coalition, not just with other oil and gas associations on the importance of permitting reform, but also supplemental energies like wind and solar. That we are going to have to advance those industries as well under permitting reform if we're going to get bipartisan permitting reform done. And they finally understand that it's not just all of the above, but it has to be all of the below as well. And that's the coalition that's going to get this done. It's why we have relationships with the big unions in this country. They understand how important permitting reform is. Alaska is the example of how we advance energy security and energy dominance in this country. That's the coalition that is going to get this done and advance our country in the long term.
I would just say that reliable, affordable, secure energy has been the status quo for most of our lifetimes of the people in this room. If we are going to continue to have that, if we're going to meet the president's objectives around a reindustrialized, profitable, thriving, growing America so that my kids who are almost in college too have a great future, it's going to require building things in this country. And it's going to require the great men and women in the oil and gas industry who are some of the greatest pioneers of technology and innovators. Every single year, we do more with less. We have fewer rigs and more production. We are gonna figure out how to get the other 90% out of the ground, and that's because of the innovation that doesn't stop with American ingenuity, free markets, and especially in this industry. I might be biased, but I think this industry is pretty great. The last thing I would say is get active. This SPEED Act, it requires the Senate. The House has already passed it. There are a lot of senators that need to hear from you about how important it is to get this done. And I agree with Mike, and the window is closing and we need to act fast.
So the only other plug that I would give is, API also operates a grassroots network that works with you to work with your members of Congress and state legislators and city councilmen and county commissioners on advancing energy projects. So if you're interested in joining that, we have chapters all over the country. Just go to energycitizens.org and join the fight, for American energy dominance.
So we talked a lot about domestic, but there's been so much movement on the international scale for international development over the last few months. What are your thoughts about Venezuela and all of the other countries coming into play again? And any thoughts about America in the world stage for energy development?
Well, so Alaska, we're on the cusp of consummating a massive gas project. It'll be the largest in the Arctic ever, probably the largest in the Pacific, 20 million tons a year of gas. Our market is Asia. Our market is Asian and will help our Asian allies get off of Russian gas coming out of Yamal and Sakhalin. Our market is to the international market. And so from our perspective, lots of smarter people can talk about where we are with oil in Venezuela, Argentina, the Falklands, all over the world. But in the end, if all of us can produce more, that's a plus, it's not a negative. Because America's become the energy giant, we have been untethered now, for example, from OPEC actions that we used to endure in the 70s and even the 80s. We're able to be freer politically to deal with our own security issues and our own relationships with the world. So energy is a diplomatic tool. You see that happening in the Ukraine and the Russian war with Europe and so forth. But in the end, if we are the king of energy, if we are the ones that we got our fingers on the tap and we got our fingers on the button, whether it's Asia, whether it's South America, whether it's Europe, a lot of good comes from that. If we're not, a lot of bad's going to come from that, to be honest.
I would just add that there's still a lot of people that live in abject poverty. To quote my friend Arjun, it's 6 billion? It is billions of people who wish they had a fraction of the life that we have in this country. And energy poverty is a real thing. We need more energy all over the world. In the United States, we are the most efficient producer, the most environmentally friendly producer. Rogue nations don't tend to produce very effectively. Some of my colleagues were down in Venezuela last week, And they talked about flying over an area where it was, 20 or 30 acres of a giant oil spill. It was how many feet deep? Who knows?
Where are the NGOs? They're all in Alaska.
They're not there, But I can tell you, where I operated in New Mexico, you had 2 teacups on the ground, and there was an absolute, all hands stand down. We are the most efficient, most environmentally friendly operators in the world, and exporting that discipline using the great, multinational oil companies that are going to go help Venezuela. One of the things that I did here, not just that 22-acre lake of crude, but how pristine the Chevron facilities were, and how exceptional they were, and how modern, and you could eat off the well pad. It was wonderful. So I think supporting the great oil and gas companies around the world that are really responsible producers will help lift people out of poverty and create a better world, which is really what I know the Secretary, the President want to do, and exporting our resources to help do that. Most countries don't have the ability to export natural gas the way we do, and it's only been in the last several, dozen years that we are now one of the largest producer and exporter in the world instead of the largest importer, which was the case before the shale revolution.
So from a European perspective, it's the US has become the supplier of first and last resort in many ways, with pipeline gas from Russia being cut off after the invasion of Ukraine, and the realization that actually creating a lazy dependence on Russia just completely played into geopolitical hands. The US yet again came to the rescue with that. But I think there's something in it for the US, which is balance of payments. It's supporting the currency. All these things are mapped up together because the opposite problem that happens in Europe is that if you import all your energy, then you have to print money to do so. So I think there's lots of broken reasons why the US using the resources responsibly, developing them, is actually good for the US as well as it is for the world for all the reasons you mentioned as well.
It's interesting because, we all woke up on that Saturday morning when, the president had made the decision to extract Maduro, which obviously, from a geopolitical perspective, was the 100% right thing to do. I mean, ours is an industry that Maduro and the predecessor regime, the Chavez regime, expropriated, a number of American oil assets. So in 2007, when Exxon Mobil and ConocoPhillips left Venezuela, they left because their fields had been expropriated. But think about the oil market that we were in 2007. The United States was producing fewer than 6 million barrels of oil every single day. And so the American industry stepped up to meet the growing demand for hydrocarbons in this country. That was right at the cusp of that shale revolution that we have all relied upon for the last decades. Those pipelines that were going north from Venezuela to American refiners that refined that heavy crude, they now came south from Canada with Canadian heavy crude. The good news is that those refineries, still 40% of the American refinery kit refines that heavy crude. They're tooled for that Venezuelan crude that could come into the United States. But Audrey's point is dead on. That heavy crude from the Orinoco Belt in Venezuela, those fields are completely deteriorated. And it's going to require billions and billions of dollars and a lot of time to get those fields back up and running again. But the good news is that the demand is going to be there. We're confident that demand is going to continue to grow, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. And it is better to have a regime that is based on free markets and free trade and private property rights than a regime that was in place that was based on a dictatorship and a totalitarianism and so-called socialism than what we were dealing with in our hemisphere. So the president deserves a lot of credit for taking the action that, by the way, every other president since the Chavez regime was in place said was their goal, which was regime change. So the industry has changed significantly since 2007, but it's very positive, I think, from our energy security perspective, that we now have a regime that it could be in place that advances American interests internationally.
The only thing I'd add is one of the great things that's happened in the last year from the day one executive order unleashing American energy is the return to normal order on LNG export permits. I mean, we have an extraordinary resource in this country that has been, the whipping boy for most politicians. They love to hate LNG, but LNG is one of the biggest liberators of people around the world. It is the source of, continued manufacturing in Europe. LNG is so important, and we are back to normal order, not just export permits, but back to building LNG export facilities and supporting that industry.
And I'll say, February 24th is actually the 10-year anniversary of the first LNG cargo from the Gulf Coast, which was going to Europe to supply our allies overseas. So we're about to be at the 10-year anniversary. We should all light a candle.
So what is the biggest hidden opportunity for American energy that the general public is completely overlooking right now?
I think it's Alaska.
Alaska, right.
It's Alaska.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, we're undergoing an oil renaissance. We're at about 495,000 barrels today, but by 2032, there's an estimate we could hit 900,000 barrels. That's a result of a lot of work by the larger companies up there, but also smaller companies that are up there as well, and wildcatters like Bill Armstrong and Pantheon Great Bear and Repsol and Santos and Hillcorp. Exactly, Donkel, yes. And so, and then the gas prospects are incredible, enormous amounts of gas. And again, we're situated where we're only 8 days from Tokyo. We're closer to Tokyo than many parts of Australia is in terms of shipment. So we were the pioneer in gas, LNG export in the world. A lot of people don't realize that. 1968, 69, Alaska was the terminal out of Nikiski was exporting gas to Japan continuously for 50 years. There was a plant in Algeria that was intermittent sending gas to Europe, but we were the ones that were continually exporting that. So we were the pioneer in that. There you go. So I think if you allow places like Alaska, but this country in general, again, if you allow, it's kind of a crazy thing to ask your federal government to allow you to. But if you're allowed to do what we know what to do, the industry knows what to do, science knows what to do, if we do that, it's going to be a tide that floats all boats from all over the place. But I think Alaska, with 20 million tons of gas that we exported on a yearly basis to our Asian allies, I think it'll be tremendous. It'll revolutionize Alaska, that's for sure, and I think it'll free up gas from the Gulf and other places to help our friends in Europe and all over the world.
So I think if your question is what is the US public not aware of, maybe the US public really isn't really appreciative of the energy abundance and what it means, because it's a gift. And it's not a gift that comes easily, and it's one that can easily go away. And so I think making sure that people are aware that it's a gift, that when they turn the lights on and drive their car, they can do it in an affordable way because of all the work that's done by the politicians and the industry, I think is very important.
And that creates a bigger opportunity of creating that energy security in other nations, not just here. What's your perspective? What do you?
I agree with that. I would say in terms of biggest unseen opportunities, that was the question. I would just say the reindustrialization of America. It's going to require more of everything.
Starting in Tulsa.
It's starting in Tulsa, but it's not just we're going to consume more oil, we're going to consume more gas. I hope we're going to consume more coal. Those are all wonderful resources, and more chemicals. They're great resources, but they're just part of the building blocks. We need more metals. We need more refining. We need more of everything in order to rebuild and reindustrialize America. It's also going to reshape the workforce. You know, we had 300 mining engineers graduate last year. We had 3,000 lawyers. I mean, there's nothing against lawyers. And I think there might have even been more than that. That might have just been the West. But we are going to have to change how we think about the workforce. And I think that's going to create both opportunities and challenges. But the reindustrialization of America under Donald J. Trump is going to be an enormous opportunity to both participate and benefit as Americans.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said on this panel. Let me put another, exclamation point on what Governor Dunleavy has just said, though. When you think about the resource, the gas resource in particular in Alaska, where we're currently taking the natural gas that is associated gas to the production of oil, and we're pumping it back into the ground. Like, it makes absolutely zero sense from a national security and from an energy security perspective. So, the potential for Alaska, I think you're absolutely right, is tremendous. But I would say that I think the most and even though we talk about it at, almost every conference I go to, is the potential for AI. We have just scratched the surface on AI going forward. Most people still use it as a glorified Google search engine. It is going to revolutionize everyone's life in this room over the course of the next few months. Not years, but months. You talk about all those lawyers. I talked to a partner at a law firm recently who said that in 5 years, they will have a third of the number of summer associates that they do right now. I mean, it is going to revolutionize almost every industry that we touch. And don't think that you're immune, but I think it's going to be a net benefit for the American oil and gas and the American energy industry.
Can I get a round of applause for this fantastic panel?
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. It's truly an honor to be part of this industry, to recognize our American heroes, to be able to attend and witness great panels like this one up here on the stage. We should also thank our NAPE partners for the support and for making this event possible. Those partners are the American Association of Professional Landmen, the Independent Petroleum Association of America, American Association of Petroleum Geologists, the Society of Exploration Geophysicists. So thanks to those groups, certainly. It is 5:02 at 5 p.m. The charity celebration and icebreaker reception started. So please head over there. It's just around the corner at the ballroom where we hosted some of the events earlier today.